They stay in combat for 37 days.
1943.
Hedgerow country.
Gestapo headquarters.
Villages
Berlin.
with names Thomas can't pronounce.
A file folder lands on a desk
Fighting
with the
that
name
grinds forward in
Hauptmann
yards
Albrecht
measured
von
against
Richthofen
casualty
stamped
lists.
across the front.
Company C receives replacements.
34. Fresh-faced boys who
Wehrmacht
arrived
intelligence
with
officers
uniforms and wide eyes.
Posted to Paris since
Most
June
don't last a
1940.
week.
The
Security
veterans,
classification,
Thomas and Mac and a handful of others who made it off the beach,
slightly
develop
suspicious.
a sixth sense for danger,
Learn
to
to
read
read
the
the
landscape, the
Learn
notation
which
had
sounds
been
mean
added 3
incoming
weeks
and which
earlier
means
by
someone
an
else's
SS
problem.
counterintelligence analyst
They
who
become
noticed something
efficient.
unusual in von Richthofen's
Professional.
communication patterns.
Good at staying alive.
Too many meetings with
They
French
don't
civilians.
talk about the beach.
Too many
Not to each
unexplained
other.
absences from his office.
Not to the replacements.
Too much time spent
Not
away
to the
from
officers
Wehrmacht
who write
headquarters on
reports about
Boulevard
acceptable
acceptable
losses,
and the
gaining
analyst
ground.
recommended surveillance. The beach exists in their minds like a
048.
separate country,
Von
a
Richthofen
place they
came
visited
from an old
but can't
Prussian
describe
family.
to people who weren't there.
His great-uncle had been
Words
the Red
fail.
Baron,
Manfred von
Memory
Richthofen,
fragments.
the legendary fighter ace
What
of the
remains
First
is
World War.
sensation,
The taste of
family
fear,
tradition,
the smell
meant
of
service,
cordite,
honor,
the sound
duty
of
to
men
the
drowning in
fatherland.
shallow water. Albrecht joined
Mac
the Wehrmacht
changes.
in 1932,
Small
studied
things at
languages
first.
at the military academy.
He stops
specialized
carving
in
birds.
intelligence work. Stops writing
By
letters.
1940, he spoke
Sits
fluent
during
French,
breaks with his
English,
rifle across
and
his
Russian.
knees, staring at
114.
When Germany
Thomas tries
invaded
once
France,
to ask if he's
von
all right,
Richthofen
and
was
Mac
assigned
looks at
to
him with
military
eyes that have
intelligence
gone
in
black and
occupied
says,
Paris. We shouldn't have made it.
His job was to
Then he
monitor
gets
French
up and walks
resistance
away,
activity,
and Thomas
identify
doesn't ask
potential
again.
threats
to German occupation
July
forces,
14.
maintain lists
A
of
village
suspected
called
collaborators
Saint-Lô.
with British intelligence.
They're dug in on the outskirts.
He was good at
waiting
his
for
job.
dawn
and the next push
His
forward.
reports were detailed,
German
accurate,
artillery has been
actionable.
probing all night.
His
Random
superiors
shells falling
trusted
in the
him
darkness,
completely.
searching for concentrations
140.
of men until February 1943.
Thomas is in a
foxhole sharing watch
That's
with
when
Mac.
Obersturm
Both
and
of them
Führer
exhausted
Klaus
beyond
Vogel,
measure,
the SS
running on
liaison
coffee
officer
and
in
fear
Paris,
and the stubborn
noticed
refusal
something
to
odd.
die.
Von
Mac is
Richthofen
talking had submitted a report
the
about
first
resistance
real
conversation
activity
they've had in
district.
weeks.
The
He's
report
talking
listed
about 6
Iowa,
French
about
citizens
his father's
suspected of
farm,
underground
about how the
activity.
corn should be waist-high by
Vogel's
now,
own
and how his
sources
little brother
confirmed
probably
5
had
of
to
the
take
names.
over the morning chores.
But the 6th person
He's talking
listed
about
didn't
home
exist.
like it's something that
still
Vogel
exists,
checked
still
civil
waits
records,
for him,
interrogation
still wants him
files,
back. Gestapo surveillance
Think we'll make
logs.
it.
Mac
No one
asks
by that
quietly.
name. A
All
false
the way
name
through
in an intelligence
report.
Think we'll actually
210.
go home.
Vogel didn't report it
Thomas
immediately.
doesn't know what to say.
He waited.
The odds seem
Watched.
impossibly long. A month later,
They've already
Von
used up
Richthofen
all the luck
submitted
any
another
two men
report.
should ever have.
This time
But
about
Mac is
suspected
looking at
British
him,
agents
actually
operating
looking
from
at him
safe
for the
houses
first time
in
in
Latin
weeks.
Quarter,
And Thomas sees his
7
friend in their
addresses
still,
listed.
underneath the 1,000-yard
Vogel's
stare
men
and the
rated
professional
6.
soldier exterior.
Found weapons,
Radio
Thomas
equipment,
lies.
coded messages.
We'll make it.
British operatives
Mac
arrested
nods.
at 5 locations.
He almost smiles.
But the 7th address,
good.
Empty
That's
apartment.
good.
Because
Nobody
I need
there.
to tell my old man something.
Furniture covered in dust.
Need to tell him I'm sorry
No
for all the
signs of
times
recent
I complained
occupation.
about getting up early to milk.
242.
Need to
2
tell him I
reports.
understand now what he was
2
teaching me.
discrepancies.
He pauses.
Vogel began to suspect
You
something
understand
was
what I
wrong.
mean. He
Thomas
orders
understands
surveillance on von
completely.
Richthofen.
I do.
The surveillance team
Good.
followed von Richthofen
Mac
for 2
settles
weeks.
back against the wall of the
Documented
foxhole.
his movements, his
That's
meetings,
good.
his routine.
The shell lands at
Most days,
4:17.
von Richthofen went to
Thomas
Wehrmacht
will remember the
headquarters at
exact
8 o'clock
time
because he was checking his
Left
watch
at
when the world
1800
exploded.
hours. Not
Returned
close
to
to
his
their
apartment
foxhole.
near Luxembourg Gardens.
Not even particularly
Nothing
near.
unusual. Maybe 70 yards away,
landing
landing
in
in
a
Tuesdays and
communication
Thursdays
trench
where a
something
squad from
different
1st
happened.
platoon was sheltering.
Von Richthofen
Just
left
one shell
headquarters
among
at lunchtime.
thousands the Germans have fired that
Walked
week.
through the city for 30
Just
minutes.
another random
taking
throw of the
seemingly
dice
random
that
routes.
somehow comes up death.
Stopped at a
But
cafe
Mac
near
is
St.
standing.
Sulpice Church.
Why is Mac
Drank
standing?
coffee alone.
Thomas will
Read
never
a
understand
newspaper.
why.
Then
Perhaps he heard
walked
something.
to a bookstore on Rue de la
Perhaps
Harpe.
he saw movement. Browsed for 15
Perhaps
minutes.
his exhausted brain simply
Bought
told him to
nothing.
do something and he obeyed.
Returned to headquarters.
Whatever the reason,
Mac is
334,
climbing out of the
foxhole,
surveillance team
exposing
reporting
himself
himself
above
above
the
the
rim,
Vogel, standing in the
It
open
didn't
like a
make
man
sense.
who has forgotten that war exists.
The routes were too circuitous.
Mac. The stops
Thomas
too
reaches
deliberate.
for him, fingers
The
brushing
timing
fabric.
too precise.
Get down.
Von Richthofen
The
was
second
either
shell
meeting
lands
someone
exactly
or
where the
checking
first
dead
one
drops.
landed,
Because German
Classic
artillery
intelligence
crews are
tradecraft.
professionals who know that men will run
Vogel
toward
ordered
casualties
phone
to
taps
help.
on von
will
Richthofen's
concentrate in
office
areas
and
just him
apartment.
because those areas feel
Listen
safer.
to every conversation for
The
3
explosion
weeks.
tears through the communication
Nothing
trench,
incriminating.
and Thomas sees it happen.
Just work discussions.
Sees
family
the flash
calls
to his parents in Bavaria.
Sees Mac's
casual
silhouetted against
conversations
him.
with colleagues.
Sees his friend
405,
lifted and thrown backward
by
into the
March,
foxhole
Vogel
like a
was
child's
convinced.
toy discarded by
by a careless
Von
hand.
Richthofen was working for
Thomas
British
catches
intelligence.
The evidence was
circumstantial,
and for
but
just
compelling.
a moment Thomas thinks maybe
False
it's not
names
so
in
bad.
reports.
Maybe the blast just
Empty
knocked him down.
addresses.
Maybe. Suspicious behavior patterns. Unexplained absences. Vogel prepared a case file. Presented it to his superior, Standartenführer Wilhelm Brenner, head of SS counterintelligence for occupied France. For 30, Brenner reviewed the evidence carefully. He knew von Richthofen's family reputation. He knew the political implications of accusing a Wehrmacht officer, especially one with such an illustrious surname, of treason. But the evidence was concerning. Brenner authorized continued surveillance. More intensive. Around the clock. If von Richthofen was a British agent, they would catch him in the act. For 55, the new surveillance team was larger. 8 men. 2 followed von Richthofen everywhere he went. 2 watched his apartment building. 2 monitored his office. 2 remained mobile, ready to assist. Von Richthofen continued his routine. Office. Cafe. Bookstore. Apartment. Nothing changed. The team found nothing concrete. 5/18, until March 15. That Tuesday, von Richthofen left Wehrmacht headquarters at noon, as usual. Walked toward St. Sulpice, as usual. But this time, he didn't stop at the cafe. He kept walking. Crossed the Seine. Entered the Tuileries Gardens. The surveillance team followed at a distance, hiding behind trees and garden sculptures. 5:42, von Richthofen stopped at a bench near the fountain. Sat down. Pulled a small notebook from his coat pocket. Wrote something. Tore out the page, folded it 3 times. Then he stood, walked to a trash receptacle 20 meters away, dropped the folded paper into the waste bin, and continued walking back toward Wehrmacht headquarters. 6:06, one of the surveillance agents retrieved the paper from the trash bin 30 seconds later. Unfolded it carefully. The message was in French. Convoy leaves Le Havre March 18, 4 o'clock. 6 supply trucks. Route, N15 toward Rouen. Minimal security. The agent photographed the note and reported to Vogel immediately. 6:31, this was it. Proof. Von Richthofen had passed intelligence to enemy agents using a dead drop. The convoy information was accurate. Wehrmacht logistics had indeed scheduled a supply movement from Le Havre to Rouen on March 18, sensitive information. Von Richthofen had access to such schedules through his intelligence work. He was passing them to the French resistance or British intelligence. Treason confirmed. 6:58, Vogel moved quickly. He couldn't arrest von Richthofen immediately. Better to catch him red-handed, with witnesses, with documentation that would stand up in a military tribunal. Better to let him continue his routine, monitor his next dead drop, identify his contact on the other side. But Brenner overruled him. Too risky. Von Richthofen had access to too much sensitive information. He needed to be arrested immediately. 7:26, on March 17, at 6:30, Gestapo agents surrounded von Richthofen's apartment building near Luxembourg Gardens. 6 men. 2 at the front entrance. 2 at the back. 2 on the stairwell. They knocked on his door at 6:35. Von Richthofen answered, still in his sleeping clothes, confused by the early visit. 7:50, Hauptmann von Richthofen, you are under arrest on suspicion of espionage and treason against the German Reich. The words echoed in the narrow hallway of the apartment building as Gestapo agents pushed past him, searching rooms, opening drawers, pulling books from shelves, tearing through closets. Von Richthofen stood motionless, hands at his sides, face expressionless. His career was finished. His family name would be destroyed. And the truth, the real truth, was hidden where no one would find it. They stay in combat for 37 days. At Gestapo headquarters on Rue de Saussures was small, villages with names illuminated by a single overhead bulb that cast harsh shadows forward in yards measured against casualty lists. Von Richthofen sat in a wooden chair, hands cupped behind fresh-faced boys who arrived with clean uniforms and wide eyes. Behind him, don't last 2 SS guards remained silent, the veterans watching. Thomas and Mack and a handful of others who made it off the beach, developed a sixth sense for danger, learned to read the landscape, learn which sounds mean incoming and which means someone else's information you pass to the enemy. They become efficient. Von Richthofen said nothing. His face remained calm, composed. They don't talk about the beach. Vogel expected defiance or fear. Not to the replacement. Instead, he saw something to the officers who write reports about acceptable losses, 851 ground. We found the note. The beach exists in their minds like a separate country, a place they visited but can't describe to people who weren't there. We know you left it in the Tuileries. Memory
we know you've been
fragments.
passing intelligence for months.
What remains is sensation.
We have evidence.
The taste of fear, the smell of witnesses, the sound of men drowning
will be
in
tried,
shallow water,
convicted,
and executed as a traitor.
Unless you
Small things at
cooperate.
first. He
Silence.
stops carving birds. Von Richthofen
Stops
looked at writing
Vogel
letters
but said nothing.
Sits during breaks with his rifle across
the
his
interrogation
knees,
lasted
staring
6
at nothing.
hours.
Thomas
Vogel
tries
asked
once to
questions.
ask if he's all right, and
Von
Mac looks at him with eyes
minimal
that have gone
answers.
flat and says,
We
yes,
shouldn't have made
he
it.
had written the note. Then he gets up
Yes,
and walks away,
he had placed
and
it in the
Thomas
trash
doesn't
bin.
ask again. No,
July
he would not
14th.
identify his contacts.
A village called St.
No, he would not explain
They're
his
dug in
motives.
on the
outskirts, waiting for dawn. He would and the not
next
beg
push
for
forward.
mercy. German interrogation has
produced
produced nothing
nothing
useful. Random shells falling
Vogel
in the
was
darkness,
frustrated,
searching for
Von
concentrations of men.
Richthofen
was protecting someone
Thomas
or something.
is in
a foxhole sharing
But
watch
what?
with Mac. Both of them exhausted
9:46.
beyond measure.
After the
Running on
interrogation,
coffee and
Von
fear, and the
Richthofen
stubborn
was
refusal
transferred
to
to
Frane's prison, south
Mac
of
is
Paris.
talking.
The
prison
first
held
real
political
conversation
prisoners,
they've had
resistance
in weeks.
fighters, suspected
He's talking
spies.
about Iowa, about his
Cell
father's farm,
317,
about how the corn should be
Third
waist high
floor.
by now and how his little
Small
brother
window,
probably had to take
iron
over
bed,
the morning
bucket
chores.
for waste.
He's talking
Von
about home like
Richthofen
it's
was
something
kept
that
in
still
solitary
exists,
confinement.
still waits for him,
No
still
visitors.
wants him back. No contact
we'll
with
make
other
it.
prisoners. Mac asks
Guards
quietly.
delivered food twice daily.
All the way through. Otherwise, silence.
Think we'll actually go home.
10:13.
Meanwhile,
Thomas doesn't know what to
Gestapo
say.
agents
searched Von
The odds
Richthofen's
seem
apartment
impossibly
systematically.
long.
They've
Found
already used
nothing
up all the luck
incriminating.
any two men should ever
No
have.
radio equipment.
But Mac is looking
No
at him,
coded
actually
messages.
looking at him for the first time
No
in
weapons.
weeks, and Thomas sees
No
his friend in
maps.
there still, underneath
Just
the 1,000-yard
books,
stare,
German
and the
philosophy,
professional soldier
French literature,
exterior, Russian poetry.
Yeah,
Thomas lies.
Personal letters from family.
We'll make it. A few
Mac
photographs.
nods.
He
mock
almost
dress
smiles.
uniform
Hanging in the closet.
Good.
Everything
That's
normal
good.
for an intelligence officer.
Because I need to tell my old man
10:41.
something.
But they did find
Need to
something
tell him I'm
unusual.
sorry
for all the times I
In the
complained
bedroom,
about getting up
tucked
early
between
between the
the
mattress and bed frame.
Need to
They
tell him I
discovered a
understand
small
now
leather
what he
journal,
was teaching me.
approximately 15 centimeters by
pauses.
10 centimeters.
You
filled
understand
with
what I
handwritten
mean.
entries in German. Thomas understands
The
completely.
journal was old, worn.
I do.
The pages yellowed with age.
Good. The
Mac
first
settles
entry was
back
dated
against the
June
wall
14th,
of the foxhole.
1940, the
That's
day
good.
German forces entered Paris.
The shell lands at 4:17.
11:08. The agent
Thomas
who
will
found the
remember
journal
the exact time
photographed because he
page.
was checking his watch when
Sent
the world
the images
exploded.
to
Gestapo headquarters.
Not close to their foxhole.
Vogel reviewed them personally. Not even particularly
The
near.
entries were strange.
Maybe 70 yards
Not
away.
military
landing
reports.
in a communication trench where
Not
a squad
intelligence
from 1st
notes.
platoon was sheltering.
Personal reflections.
Just one shell among thousands the
Observations
Germans
about
have fired
Paris.
that week. Descriptions
Just
of
another
French
random
civilians.
throw
of the dice that somehow
Thoughts
comes
about
about the
death.
occupation. But Mac is
The
standing.
writing
was introspective.
Why is Mac
philosophical,
standing?
Sometimes poetic.
Thomas will never understand
11:36.
Why.
Vogel
Perhaps he
didn't
heard
understand
something.
it.
Why
Perhaps
would
he
Von
saw
Richthofen
Richthofen keep such a journal.
Perhaps his exhausted
It
brain
served
simply
no
told him to
operational
do
purpose,
something
and he obeyed. It documented
Whatever the
nothing
reason,
strategically
Mac is
useful.
climbing out of the foxhole.
Yet he had hidden it
exposing
carefully,
himself above
placed
the rim,
it where casual
standing in the
searches
open
wouldn't
like a
find it.
man who has forgotten that
The
war
journal meant
exists.
something. Mac. Vogel decided to read
Thomas
it more carefully.
reaches for him,
Fingers brushing
11:58.
fabric. The first entry
Get down.
described Von Richthofen's
The second
arrival
shell
in
lands
Paris.
exactly where the first
The
one
city
landed,
is beautiful
because German
even under
artillery
occupation
crews
are professionals who know that
The
men will
streets are
run quiet
quiet now.
casualties to help.
The
Will
cafes
concentrate
are
in
empty.
areas just hit because
The
those
French
areas
people
feel
watch
safer.
us with silent hatred.
The explosion tears
I
through the
understand their
communication
hatred.
trench, and Thomas
We
sees
are
it happen.
invaders.
Sees
We
the
have
taken their
flash.
country, their freedom,
Sees
their
Mac
dignity.
silhouetted against it.
I am part of this.
Sees
his friend lifted and
I
thrown
wear the
backward
uniform.
into the foxhole like a
I
child's
follow
toy
orders.
discarded by a careless
But
hand.
inside,
something
Thomas
feels
catches
wrong.
him.
12:28.
Mac lands in his arms,
Vogel read
and
for
further.
just a moment Thomas thinks
Entry
maybe
after
it's not
entry
so
documented
bad.
Von
Maybe the
Richthofen's
blast just
growing
knocked him down
disillusionment
with
with
the
the
Nazi regime. We arrest people without evidence. We interrogate citizens without cause. We destroy lives based on suspicion alone. This is not the Germany I believed I was serving. This is not the honor my great-uncle fought for in the last war. 12:56. One entry from July 1940 described an incident at a café. Von Richthofen had been sitting alone, drinking coffee, reading a newspaper. An elderly French woman approached him cautiously. She spoke to him in broken German. Asked if he knew what happened to her son, arrested 2 days earlier by Gestapo agents. Von Richthofen checked his files later. The son had been executed as a suspected resistance member. Evidence, none. 1328, I told her I didn't know, Von Richthofen wrote in his journal. I lied to her. I knew her son was dead. Killed for nothing. No trial. No evidence. Just suspicion and fear. She thanked me for listening. Said I seemed kind for a German officer. I wanted to tell her the truth. But what good would truth do? her son would still be dead. And telling her would only cause more pain. So I lied. And I have been lying ever since. 1402, Vogel stopped reading. He understood now. Von Richthofen wasn't a British agent working for money or ideology. He was something more dangerous. A believer who had lost faith. A soldier who had seen too much injustice and could no longer participate in it. The journal entries became more explicit after October 1940. 1429, I have decided to act, von Richthofen wrote. I cannot stop the machine. I cannot change the system. But I can save individual lives. Small acts. Subtle interventions. I will use my position to protect those I can protect. When I write intelligence reports, I will include false information, names that don't exist, addresses that lead nowhere. The Gestapo will waste time chasing ghosts while real resistance members escape. They stay in combat for 37 days. Was clever. Hedgerow country. Richthofen would submit reports villages that with names Thomas can't pronounce. Most of the information would be accurate in yards measured against his casualty lists. But he would insert small errors, replacements, false fresh-faced boys who arrive with clean uniforms and wide eyes. Enough to disrupt Gestapo operations without arousing immediate suspicion. Thomas and Mack and a handful of others who made it off from inside Wehrmacht developed a sixth sense for danger, learned to read the landscape. The journal documented his methods in detail, which means someone else's problem. Today I submitted a report listing 8 suspected resistance members in Belleville. Good at 7 names were genuine. They don't talk about the beach. I know they will be arrested. Not to each other. I cannot save everyone. Not to the replacements. But the 8th name, not to the officers who write reports about acceptable losses. The address I provided is an abandoned building. The beach exists in their minds like a separate investigating a place they visited but can't describe to people. A real resistance cell operates 3 blocks away, unknown memory fragments. 1600 hours. Sensation. Vogel read entry after entry. The smell of cordite. The sound of men had been running this operation for nearly 3 years. Mac changes. Dozens of false small things at first. Hundreds of wasted surveillance hours. Countless resistance members who escaped arrest because Gestapo agents rifle across his distant targets, staring at nothing. The scope was staggering. Thomas tries once to ask if he's all right, and Mac looks at him with eyes that have gone flat and says, "We shouldn't have made it." Then he gets up and walks away, but the journal also reveals something Vogel hadn't anticipated. July 14th. Von Richthofen knew he would be caught eventually. They're dug in on the outskirts, calmly, waiting for dawn and the next push forward. I understand the mathematics of my situation. Has been probing all night. Each false report increases the probability of searching for concentrations of men. Each fabricated name adds to the pattern someone will eventually notice. With Mac. Both of them exhausted beyond 6 months, running maybe on coffee and fear, and an analyst realizes what I'm doing. Mac when that happens, I will be arrested. The first real conversation they've had in weeks. I accept He's talking about Iowa, about his father's farm, the journal entries from late 1942 show his little brother probably preparing for his morning chores. He burned letters from about home like it's something that still exists, destroyed anything that might implicate others, still wants him back, simplified his life until nothing remained except his work and his journal. Quietly. I have no illusions about my fate, he wrote in January 1943. Thomas doesn't know what to say. The odds seem some of those I hope will survive. They've already used up all the luck any 2 men should ever have. 1733, but Vogel is looking at the file, actually looking at him for the first time in weeks, to find evidence of a spy ring, his friend contact protocols, underneath the 1,000-yard stare and the professional soldier exterior. He found a confession of conscience. Yes, Thomas lies. Von Richthofen wasn't working for British intelligence. Mac nods. He was working against German injustice. Good. Alone. That's good. Without support. Because I need to tell my old man something. Recognition or reward. Need to tell him I'm sorry for all the times he believed it was right. About getting up early to milk. 1803. Need to tell him I understand now what he was teaching me. Espionage on behalf of a foreign power was clear treason. You understand punishable by death. Thomas understands but sabotage completely. Motivated by moral objection. I do. That good. Was murkier. Max settles back against the wall of betrayed military secrets to the enemy. That's good. He has shelled undermined Gestapo operations by wasting their time. Thomas will remember the exact time because he was checking his watch when the world exploded. Or was it something else? Not close to their foxhole. 1833, Vogel not even particularly near. They discussed the implications for landing in a communication trench both where men understood the political problem was sheltering. If they just one shell among thousands the Germans have fired, they would need to prove he worked for British intelligence. Just another random throw of the dice. But the journal showed he worked for no one except his own conscience. But Mac is standing. If they charged him with sabotage, they would need Thomas to prove will never understand undermine German operations. Perhaps he heard something. The journal proved that perhaps he saw but movement. It also documented his motives perhaps in a way that might generate simply told him to do something. In 1905, A Wehrmacht
Whatever the
officer
reason,
from an
Mac
aristocratic
is climbing
family,
out of the foxhole,
disillusioned by
exposing
Gestapo
himself
brutality,
above the rim,
acting to save
standing in the
innocent
open
lives.
like a man who has forgotten
If that
war
story
exists.
reached the Wehrmacht High Command
Mac,
or became public knowledge,
Thomas
it could
reaches for
cause
him,
problems.
fingers brushing fabric.
Questions about Gestapo
Get down.
methods. The second
Questions
shell
about the
lands
morality
exactly
of
where the first
occupation
one
policies,
landed, because German artillery
questions the
crews are
regime didn't
professionals
want
who know
asked.
that men will run toward casualties to help,
1936
will
Brenner
concentrate
made a
in
decision.
areas just hit because those
The journal
areas
would
feel
be
safer.
classified.
The explosion tears through the communication
Von
trench,
Richthofen would be
and
charged
Thomas
with
sees it happen.
espionage and sabotage.
Sees the flash.
The trial would be closed to
Sees
the
Mac
public.
silhouetted against it. No press coverage. Sees his friend lifted
No
and thrown
detailed
backward into the
transcripts.
foxhole like a child's
Just a
toy
quiet
discarded by a
execution
careless
followed
hand.
by an administrative notation
Thomas
in
catches
military
him.
records.
Mac lands
Death
in his
by
arms,
firing
and
squad
for just
for
a
treason.
moment Thomas thinks maybe
The
it's not so
Richthofen
bad,
family name
maybe
would be
the blast
destroyed,
just knocked
but
the
the
truth
truth
would
maybe.
remain hidden. Problem solved. They stayed
2000
in
hours,
combat for
the
37
military
days.
tribunal convened on April 2,
Hetero country.
1943,
Villages with names
at
Thomas
Wehrmacht
can't
headquarters
pronounce
on Boulevard Raspail.
Fighting that grinds forward in
judges,
yards measured
all
against
high-ranking
casualty
officers.
lists.
A
Company
military
C receives
prosecutor
replacements,
from the Judge Advocate
fresh-faced
General's
boys who
office.
arrive with clean uniforms
No
and
defense
wide eyes.
attorney.
Von
Most
Richthofen
don't
declined
last a
legal
week.
representation. The veterans,
The trial
Thomas
was
and
expected
Mac
to
and a
last
handful
one
of
day.
others who made it off the beach,
2030,
develop a
Von
sixth
Richthofen
sense for
stood
danger,
at attention
learn
as
to
the
read the
charges
lands
were
were
read.
learn which sounds mean
Espionage
incoming
on
and which
behalf
means
of
someone
enemy
else's
forces.
problem.
They become
Sabotage of
efficient,
German military intelligence
professional,
operations. Good at
staying
betrayal of
alive.
military oaths. They don't talk about
Bringing
bringing dishonor to the Wehrmacht
not to
officer
each other.
corps. Not
Each
to the
charge
replacements.
carried
The death penalty. Not to the officers
The
who write
prosecutor
reports
presented
about
evidence
acceptable
methodically.
losses and gaining
The surveillance
ground. Photos from the Tuileries
The beach
Gardens.
exists
in their minds like a
The note
separate
about
country,
the convoy.
a place they visited.
Testimonies from
Vogel
people
about the
who weren't
false
there.
names and intelligence
Words
reports.
fail.
21
Memory
fragments. The judges reviewed the
What
documents
remains is
carefully.
sensation.
The taste
The
of
evidence
fear,
of
the smell
sabotage
of
was
cordite,
clear.
the sound of men
Von
drowning in
Richthofen
shallow
had
water.
deliberately provided false
Mac
information in
changes.
official reports.
Small things at
The
first.
question was whether this
He
constituted
stops carving
espionage.
birds. The prosecutor
Stops writing
argued it
letters.
did. The
Sits
defendant
during
passed
breaks with his
military
rifle
intelligence
across
to
his
enemy
knees,
agents
staring
through a
at
dead
nothing.
drop. Thomas
is
tries
classic
to ask
espionage
if he's all
tradecraft.
right, and Mac looks at
The
him with
fact
eyes
that he
that
claims
have gone
moral
flat and
objections
says,
as motivation
"He shouldn't have
is
made it."
irrelevant.
Then he gives up and walks away, and Thomas doesn't ask again. Von Richthofen was
14th.
permitted to speak. A village
He
called
stood
St.
calmly,
hands at his
They're
sides,
dug in on the
voice
outskirts,
steady, waiting for dawn
I do not
and the
deny
next
the
push
charges.
German
I wrote false
artillery has been
information in my
probing all
reports.
night. Random shells
I
falling
left
in
the
the dark
note
about the convoy
searching
searching
for
for concentrations of men. I acted deliberately
Thomas
to
is in a
undermine
Gestapo
Gestapo sharing watch
operations.
with Mac. Both of them
But I was
exhausted
not working
beyond
for
measure,
British
running on
intelligence.
coffee and fear and
I
a
was
stubborn
working for my
refusal to die.
conscience.
Mac is talking.
2202, he paused.
The first real conversation
The
they've
courtroom
had
was
in
silent.
weeks. He's
I
talking
joined the
about
Wehrmacht
Iowa,
to serve
about
Germany,
his father's
he
farm,
continued.
about how the corn should
I
be
believed
raised
in
high by
duty,
now and
honor,
how his little brother
service to the
probably had to
fatherland.
take over the morning chores.
But
over 3 years in
He's
Paris,
talking about
I saw
home
what
like
the
it's something
occupation
that still
had become.
exists,
Still waits
mass
for him,
arrests without
still wants him
evidence.
back. Executions
make it.
without trials. Mac asks
Torture.
quietly.
Terror.
All the way through,
This
is not the Germany I swore
will
to
actually
defend.
go home.
This is not
Thomas
the honor
doesn't
my
know what to
family
say.
name represents. The odds seem
2235.
impossibly long. The judges
They've
listen
already
without
used up
expression.
all the luck any two men
Von
should ever
Richthofen continued. But Mac is looking
I
at
could
him,
not stop the
actually
system.
looking at him for the first time
I
in
could
weeks,
not change
and
policy.
Thomas sees his friend in there
But I
still,
could save
underneath the
individual
1,000-yard
lives.
stare and the professional
Jewish
soldier
family
exterior.
here.
A
Yeah,
resistance
Thomas
member there.
lies.
Small
We'll make
acts
it.
that made little difference
Mac
in the larger
nods.
scheme.
He
But they
almost
were the only
smiles.
acts available to me.
Good.
So I
That's
took
good.
them.
Because I
accept
need
the
to tell my old
consequences.
man something.
2305.
Need to tell him I'm sorry
The
for all the
prosecutor
times I
objected.
complained about getting up
The
early to
defendant
milk.
attempts to justify
Need
treason
to tell
with
him I
philosophical
understand now what he
abstractions.
was teaching me.
The law is
He
clear.
pauses.
He
violated
understands
his
what I
oath.
mean. He
Thomas
sabotaged
understands
military
completely.
operations. I do. He communicated with
Good.
enemy forces. Mac settles back
Intent
against
and
the wall of
motivation
the
are
foxhole.
irrelevant.
That's
He
good.
is
guilty under military
The
law
shell
and
lands
must be
at
punished
4:17.
accordingly.
Thomas will remember the
23:33,
exact time
the judge
because
was
he was
retired
checking
to
his
deliver
watch
it.
when the world exploded.
They returned 30 minutes
Not
later.
close to their foxhole.
Guilty on all charges.
Not
even particularly near. Sentence. Death
Maybe
by firing
70 yards
squad.
away.
Landing in a
Execution
communication
scheduled
trench
for April
April
10,
10, from 1st Platoon was
1943.
sheltering. Von
Just one
Richthofen
shell among
showed no
thousands
emotion.
the Germans have fired that
He
week.
stood at attention,
Just
saluted
another
the
random
judges,
throw of
and
the
was
dice
led
that
from the
somehow
courtroom by
comes out
guards.
death.
But Mac is
standing.
News of the verdict
Why is
reached
Mac
Wehrmacht
standing?
headquarters immediately. Thomas will never understand why. Officers whispered in hallways. Perhaps he heard something. Some expressed shock. Perhaps he saw movement. Others expressed satisfaction. Perhaps his exhausted brain simply told him to do something, exposed and sentenced. Whatever the reason, Justice served. Mac is climbing out of the foxhole, but others had doubts. Exposing himself above the rim. Von Richthofen standing in the open like a man who has forgotten that his work had been exemplary. Mac, the charges seemed strange. Thomas reaches for him, fingers brushing fabric. Hours 28, Von Richthofen's family was notified. The second shell lands exactly where the first one landed. His father, because German artillery crews are professionals who know that men will run toward casualties to help, in Bavaria, will concentrate in areas just hit because those areas feel convicted of espionage and sentenced to death. The explosion tears through the communication scheduled April 10th, Thomas military honors denied. Sees the flash. Name to be struck from family records. Mac silhouetted against it. The general was devastated. Sees his friend lifted and thrown backward into the foxhole like a child's toy discarded by a traitor son. Thomas 2400 hours 59. Mac lands in his arms, and for just a moment Thomas thinks maybe it's not so requesting clemency. Maybe the blast just knocked him down. Explanation of the charges. His letters were ignored. He traveled to Berlin, demanded meetings with senior officers. He was told the case was closed, the verdict final, appeal impossible. His son would be executed as scheduled. The family reputation would never recover. 25:30, in his cell at Frane's prison, von Richthofen spent his final days in silence. Guards reported he was calm, resigned, almost peaceful. He requested writing materials. Permission. They stay in combat for 37 days. He wrote letters to his parents. Hedgerow country. Long letters explaining his actions with names expressing love, apologizing for the shame fighting that grinds forward in yards measured against casualty lists. I do not regret my choices, he wrote. Company C receives replacements. I regret the pain those choices who arrive with clean uniforms and wide eyes. 26:02. He also wrote a week, leaving his few possessions to his younger sister. Thomas and Mac and a handful of others who made it off the beach. Photographs. Develop a sixth sense personal for danger. Items. Learn to read the landscape. Nothing of significant which sounds mean incoming and which means someone else's one problem. Thing. Please see that my journal is preserved. Professional. Someday, someone will understand why I acted as I did. They don't talk about the beach, matters, even if it comes not late. To each other. 26:31. On April 9, not to the officers who write scheduled execution, acceptable losses, and received an unexpected visitor. The beach exists in their minds like a separate country, Wehrmacht intelligence officer who had worked with to people who were in Paris. Words Mueller had heard about the conviction and wanted to see his former colleague one final time. What remains is sensation. The guards allowed a 30-minute visit. The smell of cordite, the sound of men drowning in shallow water. Mueller entered the cell cautiously. Changes. Von Richthofen at first shook his hand. He stops carving birds. They sat on the iron bed, speaking writing letters. Mueller asked a question with his rifle across his knees, staring at nothing. Von Richthofen told Thomas tries once to ask if he's all right, and Mac looks at him with eyes that have gone flat and says, the decision to have made it. Mueller then he gets up and walks away, and Thomas doesn't ask again. When von Richthofen finished, Mueller was silent for a long moment. A village called 27:32. They're dug in on the outskirts, Mueller waiting for dawn and the next push forward. I've seen the same things in Paris. German artillery has been probing all arrests, random shells falling in the darkness, searching for concentrations of men. I told myself it was necessary for security. Mac, both of them exhausted, but I was lying to myself, running on coffee and fear and a stubborn refusal to die. I did not. Mac is talking. Von Richthofen. The first real conversation they've had. It was not courage. He's talking about Iowa, about his father's farm, not continue about how the corn should be waist high by now, and how his little brother probably had to take over to remember von Richthofen's truth. He's talking about home like whatever happened still reputation, still the official records still wants him back. I will remember what you told me today. Think we'll make it. And someday, Mac asks if Germany survives this war, all the way tell others. I mean, your truth will not actually go home. Von Richthofen doesn't know what to say. They shook hands. Seem impossibly long. Mueller left the cell. They've already used up all the luck any two men should ever have. 28:33. But Mac is looking at him. April 10th, actually looking at him for the first time in weeks. And Thomas sees his friend in there still. Von Richthofen was removed from his cell at 6 o'clock. Professional soldier exterior. Led through corridors. Downstairs. Into a courtyard behind Frane's prison. Mac nods. A firing squad of 8 Wehrmacht soldiers stood at attention. Good. An officer read the execution order aloud. Because I need to tell my old man something. Von Richthofen was offered a blindfold. Need to tell him I'm sorry for all the times I complained about getting up early to milk. 29:00. Need to tell him I understand now what he was teaching me. Von Richthofen spoke clearly. You understand what I mean. I die without understands completely. I betrayed the regime, but I remained faithful to my conscience. Mac settles back against the wall of the foxhole. The officer steps back. The firing squad raised their rifles. Thomas will remember the exact time because he was checking his watch when the world exploded. 8 rifles fired close to their foxhole. Not even particularly near. The prison doctor 70 yards away, landing in a communication trench where a squad from 1st was sheltering. His body was buried in an unmarked grave at a municipal cemetery outside that week. Just another random throw of the dice that somehow comes on death. But Mac is standing. Just an administrative notation, unknown Thomas will never understand why. Died April 10, perhaps 1943. Perhaps he saw issued a brief statement, Perhaps his exhausted brain simply told him to do something and he obeyed. His name is expunged from military records. Mac is climbing out of the foxhole. His family name is above the rim, standing in the open like a man who has forgotten the journal remained in Gestapo files, classified and forgotten. Thomas reaches for him. Vogel filed with Russian evidence, marked sensitive material. No public access. The second shell lands exactly where the first one landed to Berlin because German artillery crews evacuated Paris know that August 1944 as Allied forces will concentrate in areas just hit from there. Those areas disappeared into the chaos of the collapsing. The explosion tears through the communication trench, and Thomas sees for nearly 2 years. Von Richthofen's truth remained buried with sees Mac silhouetted against the official story was simple. Sees his traitor executed and thrown backward into the foxhole. His family mourned in silence. Toy discarded by a careless hand. His former colleagues avoided mentioning his name. His actions lands in his arms, and for just a moment across occupied maybe France, it's not so dozens bad. Of people he maybe had saved, the blast just people whose names had been falsified in his reports, whose addresses had led nowhere, continued living, never knowing who had protected them. They stayed in combat for 37 days. May 8, 1945. Hetero country. Germany villages with names Thomas can't pronounce. The war in Europe ended. Fighting that grinds forward in yards measured against occupied German territory. Cataloging documents, arresting war-faced boys who arrive with evidence of Nazi and wide eyes. In Berlin, most don't last a week, and Soviet troops divided the city between Thomas and Mac and a handful Gestapo of others who made it off have been destroyed by develop a sixth but underground archives learn to read the landscape, learn which sounds mean incoming and which means someone else's among the thousands of files recovered was a box marked counterintelligence, Paris district, good at staying 1943. They don't talk inside about the case files, interrogation reports, surveillance not to the replacements. And one not small to the other journal with the name about acceptable losses written inside the ground. An American exists in their minds like James Morrison, found the journal while sorting can't describe to people who weren't there. He could read German. Words failed. He began reading out of memory fragments. 33 what remains is sensation. Morrison spent 3 hours reading the journal that afternoon. The sound of men drowning in shallow water. He understood he had found something important. Small things not military first. Intelligence. He stops carving not evidence of war crimes. Stops writing letters. But a testimony of conscience sits during breaks with his rifle across his knees. He filed a report with his commanding officer. Thomas tries once to ask if he's all right, historical and purposes. Mac looks at him with eyes that have gone flat and says, "We shouldn't have 33:40." Then he gets up and walks away. The National Archives and Thomas doesn't ask D.C. along with thousands of other captured documents. A village sat in storage for 6 years. They're dug in on the outskirts. Waiting for dawn and the next push forward. A German historian named artillery has been probing all night, searching random shells falling in the darkness, Nazi searching for concentrations of men. He discovered Morrison's report Thomas referencing Von Richthofen's watch with Mac. Both of them exhausted requested access to the document. On coffee and fear and a stubborn refusal to die. Hauptmann read the journal carefully. Took detailed notes, the first real conversation they've had against other historical records. He's talking about everything Von about his father's farm could be corroborated. About how the corn should be waist high by now and how his little brother probably the events he described were real. The resistance about home he claimed something that still exists, still waits for him. Hauptmann realized this was the first documented case of a Wehrmacht intelligence officer deliberately sabotaging Gestapo operations all the way through. Inside. I mean. 34 will actually go home. Hauptmann published his findings doesn't know what to say. In a German academic journal. Impossibly long. The article was titled already used up all the luck any two men should ever have. Hauptmann Albrecht von Richthofen. But Mac is looking at him. It actually looking at him for the first time in weeks. His motives, Thomas sees his execution still. Underneath the article generated immediate professional soldier exterior. Some historians praised von Richthofen as a moral hero. We'll make it. Others criticized him for betraying his oath. He almost smiles. Military veterans were divided. That's good. 35:20 because I need to tell my old man's family read the article with mixed emotions. Need to tell him I'm sorry for all the times I complained about getting up early to milk. Richthofen had died in 1948. Tell him I understand now what he was believing his son was a traitor. He pauses. But his sister, you understand what I mean. Still alive. Thomas understands Hauptmann's article multiple times. I do. Weeping. Good. I knew Albrecht was not a traitor. Settles back against the wall of the foxhole. I knew there was more to the story. The shell lands at 4:17. Thomas will remember the exact time because he was checking his watch when the Wehrmacht officer who had visited Von Richthofen to their foxhole also read the article. Not even particularly near. He was now living in Munich, maybe 70 yards away, working as a landing in a communication trench where he contacted Hauptmann immediately sheltering. Confirmed just one shell from his conversation with Von Richthofen that week. He told me another random throw of the dice that somehow comes up death. He said he acted by conscience, not ideology. Why is Mac standing? I believed him then. Thomas will never understand why. I was right to believe him. Perhaps he heard something. 36:26. Perhaps he saw movement. Hartmann continued researching. Perhaps his exhausted brain simply told him to do something and he operated in Paris during the occupation. Whatever the reason, Mac is climbing out of the narrow escape, exposing himself that somehow never materialized, standing in the open like a man who has forgotten that war exists. We thought we were lucky, one former resistance fighter told Hartmann, fingers brushing fabric. We never knew someone inside Wehrmacht intelligence was protecting us. The second shell lands exactly where the first one landed. We owe our lives because German artillery crews are professionals who know that men will run toward casualties to help. In 1961, areas just Margaret because those areas feel submitted a petition to the German government. The explosion tears through the communication trench, and Thomas sees it happen. She presented Hartmann's research, Mueller's testimony, and the journal itself as evidence. Sees his petition was reviewed by a military tribunal like a child's toy discarded by a careless hand. The tribunal issued its decision, conviction overturned. Mac lands in his arms, and for just a moment Thomas thinks maybe it's not so bad, maybe the blast just knocked him down, maybe. His actions, while technically violations of military law, were morally justified. 37:41, the Richthofen family name was restored. Albrecht's military rank was posthumously reinstated. A formal apology was issued. The German government recognizes that Hauptmann von Richthofen acted with extraordinary moral courage in circumstances that demanded impossible choices. His memory deserves honor, not condemnation. 38:10, in 1965, a memorial plaque was placed at the site of Freynes prison, where von Richthofen had been executed. The inscription read, "In memory of Hauptmann Albrecht von Richthofen, 1909–1943. Wehrmacht intelligence officer who risked his life to save others. Executed for following his conscience. His courage remains." 38:38, today, von Richthofen's journal is preserved at the German Resistance Memorial Center in Berlin. Visitors can read photocopies of the original pages, see photographs of von Richthofen in uniform, learn about his life and death. The exhibit is titled One Man's War, Resistance from Within. 39:05, historians continue debating von Richthofen's legacy. Was he a hero or a traitor? Did his actions make a meaningful difference? Could one man working alone really disrupt Gestapo operations significantly? The numbers suggest yes. Records show that between 1940 and 1943, Wehrmacht intelligence in Paris submitted approximately 1,200 reports to the Gestapo. Of those, researchers have identified at least 73 containing false or misleading information consistent with von Richthofen's methods. 73 opportunities for resistance members to escape. 73 lives potentially saved. 39:45, the journal ends with an entry dated April 9, 1943, the day before von Richthofen's execution. He wrote, "Tomorrow I will die. I am not afraid. I have lived according to my conscience. I have acted when others remained silent. I do not know if my actions mattered. I do not know if the people I tried to protect will survive the war. But I know I tried. That is enough. Let those who find this journal understand, honor is not found in obedience to evil orders. Honor is found in resistance to them." 40:15, they thought he was a traitor. For 2 years, his name meant dishonor. But his hidden diary revealed the truth. Albrecht von Richthofen was not a traitor to his country. He was faithful to something deeper, the conscience that refuses to accept cruelty, even when cruelty is policy. His war was fought in silence, with small acts that saved lives one at a time. And in the end, those small acts were enough. The diary proved it. And history remembered. 40:40, silence.